Hi students, in this video I will be discussing ratios. I'm going to use the March 2024 exam paper. It's question 3. It's a good question to practice on because they ask you most of the common ratios that are new in matric. But also in this video, I'm going to be discussing how you should answer and keywords that will tell you which indicator to look for. So let's start. It says, you are provided with information relating to South Limited for the financial year ended the 29th of Feb 2024. South Limited issued new shares to the existing shareholders at 850 cents, which is the same thing as saying 8 Rand and 50 cents per share. The directors are happy about the liquidity of the company. Quote, two financial indicators with figures to support the statement. So there are two things that stick out here. Number one, you are going to quote financial indicators that, of course, is liquidity indicators. So you must know liquidity indicators, and these indicators are going to be your current ratio, your asset test ratio, your stock turnover rate, your stock holding period, the debtors average collection period, and then the creditors payment period. But specifically, you want to indicate ratios that the directors are happy in, which means that these liquidity ratios have improved, and it says, quote, two financial indicators to support the statement. So I printed out the other copy so it's easier to see. Okay, so this is the list of financial indicators that they give you, and here's all the indicators. Now, if you look at all of the indicators, we don't really have a lot of liquidity ratios. So the only two that we do have is the debtors collection. Actually, we have three: the debtors collection period, the creditors payment period, and the rate of stock turnover. So now you're going to see by the process of elimination which two to take. So remember, you're looking for liquidity ratios that have improved. Let's start with the debtors collection period. So it went from 28 days to 30 days. That means that the debtors are taking 2 days longer to pay us, right? Then the creditors payment period went from 35 days to 20 days. That means we are paying our creditors faster. But closely, if you look at it, we are paying the creditor within 20 days. And the debtors are paying me only after 30 days. So I would not take this ratio because typically this is not how business works. You would want to receive the money from your debtors first and then pay your creditors. So I would not quote the creditors payment period. And then the rate of stock turnover is the last one. This did improve. It went from 3 times to 5 times. Again, the rate of stock turnover is telling me how fast the stock is getting sold, right? Turnover means it's becoming sales. So how fast are you making sales from the inventory that you have? So it improved from 3 times to 5 times more. Our stock is being sold. All right, so the two financial indicators that I would choose here for improvement or to show that the shareholders would be happy is the debtors collection period and the rate of stock turnover. Okay, so let me just get my paper. And then I would say 3.1. I'm not sure. You can see that. Okay. I would say let's start off with the rate of stock turnover. I would say the rate of stock turnover increased from 3 times to 5 times by 2 times. All right. And then I would say I would quote the debtors collection period now. So the debtors collection period decreased from 28 days. Oh, sorry, not it decreased, it increased from 28 days to 30 days. Now, even though this is a decrease, it's still within 30 days, which is the acceptable time that you allow a debtor to pay. So I'm just going to add here 30 days is still within a month. And if you look at the mark scheme, it's 4. So most of the time we're going to give you a mark for quoting the correct financial indicator and then the trend. What is the trend? Whether you say that it increased or decreased, and then from to by, that's a trend. So one trend here, increased or decreased, and then from to, oh, I never add the day, by 2 days. From to by, that's another trend, and that's 4 marks. Okay, next one, 3.2. So it says, shareholders are satisfied with the issue price of new shares. Quote 2 financial indicators with figures to support the statement. So just now during the reading time, we read that South Limited issued new shares to existing shareholders at 850 cents. All right. Now, whenever they say anything about an issue price, you are going to compare the market value with the net asset value. All right. You are going to compare the market value with the net asset value. So the market value is the market value on the JSE, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Now, the market value is the value that we sell these shares for to the public. Typically, we want the market value to be higher, because if it's higher, when we do decide to sell the shares, we are getting more money for the shares. And then the net asset value is the actual worth of the shares. So if I look at 28th of Feb 2024, the market value is 810 cents. That means I'm selling it to the public for 8 rand and 10 cents. But the value of the share is only 6 rand and 95 cents, or 695 cents, which means that this share is overvalued. But because it's overvalued, it's a good thing for me as a shareholder, because if I decide to sell the shares now, I'm getting more money for the shares. Okay. So you would compare again, whenever they talk about a share issue price, you are going to compare the market value with the net asset value. All right. And you would compare it for this year, because you are saying why the shareholders are happy, or why are they not satisfied. Okay, so let me just write down for a share issue price, whenever they talk about this, you're going to compare market value and net asset value. All right. So you would say the market value of 810 cents is higher than the net asset value of 695 cents. Okay. So you would get a mark for mentioning the market value, the net asset value, and that it's higher, which means that these shares are overvalued. So when they are overvalued, it's a good thing for me, all right? I didn't have to add that last part, but it's just for explanation. All right, 3.3 says, one of the directors feel that a loan should be paid as soon as possible. Do you agree? So you're going to say yes or no, whether do you agree or not. Explain or quote two financial indicators with figures to support your answer. So there is a very specific way in which you answer any loan question. It's similar to the way you answer return on shareholders equity question, or where they ask you whether the shareholders would be satisfied with their investment. Okay, so there's 3 financial indicators that you quote when you are discussing a loan. All right, so I know that they say quote 2 financial indicators, but I'm going to show you the way that most of the questions need to be answered. Most of this type of loan question needs to be answered. So when you say anything about a loan, the first thing that you're going to quote is the debt to equity ratio. The second thing that you will quote is the return on capital employed. Now again, the return on capital employed is basically the ratio that is telling me what is the return of employing this loan in my business. What is the return of employing this capital in my business? And I compare this return on capital employed. So I'm going to say compare with interest rate, not any interest rate, but the interest rate of the loan. Okay, so it's quite an easy question when you know what to quote. So number 1, I go to the debt to equity ratio. I see that it went from 0.28 to 0.6, which means that the debt to equity ratio decreased. So I will say the debt to equity ratio decreased from 0.28 is to 1 to 0.06 is to 1. Then I'm going to quote the return on capital employed. So if you look, the return on capital employed, which means the return for using the loan, basically, it went from 14% to 24%, which is very good. So I would say, I'm not sure if you saw that, but it went from 14% to 24%. The return on capital employed increased from 14% to 24%. Okay. And then the last thing is that you compare the return on capital employed with the interest rate of loan, with the interest rate of the loan of this year. So if you look at the return on capital employed this year, it was 24%, and the interest rate on the loan this year was 16%. So I am paying an interest rate to pay back the loan at 16%, but the return that I'm getting from using this loan is 24%, which is worth it. Okay, so this is how I'm going to put it. I'm going to say the return on capital employed of 24% is higher than the return, than the interest rate on loan of 16%. And then you can say okay, I would say by 8%. And then I can say this indicates positive gearing. Okay, this indicates positive gearing, and the reason why it indicates positive gearing is because the return on capital employed is greater than the interest on loan, which is a good thing. Positive gearing. Okay, and here I can also say this indicates low risk. Low risk is because my debt to equity ratio decreased. Please learn this. It's a very good question, and it's easy marks to get when you know what to quote. So this will help you. Next one. Okay. So it says shareholders are not satisfied with the return on their investment and the dividends they received. Explain and quote 2 financial indicators with figures to support this opinion. All right. So typically when they say that the shareholders are not satisfied with their investment, or when they say they are satisfied with their investment, we look at the return on shareholders' equity. Basically, this ratio is saying this is what you are getting for investing in the company. So the return on shareholders' equity is 8.6% last year, but it increased to 9.1%. However, when you are comparing the return on shareholders' equity, you also look at the interest rate on investment. So the interest rate on investment for 2024 is 10%. So in the shareholder's mind, you had a choice. You chose to invest in the company instead of using a fixed deposit. If you had invested in the fixed deposit, I would have got 10%. But because you chose to invest in the company, you only got 9.1%, which explains why the shareholder is not happy. Okay, so similarly, like how you compare the return on capital employed with the interest on loan, you compare the return on shareholders' equity with the interest rate on the investment. Okay, so first we're going to start off by quoting the return on shareholders' equity. So here, whenever they say that a shareholder is either satisfied, or they ask you whether the shareholder should be satisfied or not satisfied, you are going to quote the return on shareholders' equity, whether it increased or decreased, and then you're going to compare the return on shareholders' equity with the interest on fixed deposit. Okay, so we'll say that the return on shareholders' equity increased from 8.6 to 9.1. Return on shareholders' equity increased from 8.6% to 9.1%, right? Then you're going to say, however, the interest rate on investment, which is another word for saying the interest rate on the fixed deposit it was 10%. The interest rate on investment of 10% is higher than the return on shareholders' equity. Okay, I just wrote short form there, but please don't write short form. Okay, which explains why the shareholders are not satisfied. So this also works for if they ask the shareholders are satisfied, you would quote the exact same thing, except now that obviously the return from the company would be greater than the return on shareholders' equity, would be greater than the return on the fixed deposit. Okay. Next one. It says share capital and percentage shareholding refer to information C. Injabulo and Dunford, I think it's Dunford decided that they would combine their votes at the upcoming annual general meeting. So they would combine their votes. And whenever you talk about voting, you are thinking about majority shareholding. And remember that to be a majority shareholder, you must own 51% or more shares. Explain one possible reason for this decision with figures. Okay, so they want a reason and they want it with figures. So let's go and look at the information. It says extract from shareholders register. Injabulo and Dunford are shareholders in the company, but they are not directors. Okay, so they are not running the company, they are not involved in the running of the company. So Injabulo at the beginning of the year was owning 22% and Dunford was owning 16%. And at the beginning of the year, they owned 38%. But now at the end of the year, Injabulo bought more shares, 27%, and so did Dunford, 25%. And together, when they combine their shareholding, they have a majority shareholding of 52%. All right, what does this mean? Number one, you're just going to keep your answer very simple, that a majority shareholder has more influence over decision-making processes, and they have more of a say at the annual general meeting. All right, so In the question, they ask for a possible reason for this decision, which would be majority shareholding, and then you would just use these figures here to show that they have 52%. Okay, so let's start off with the figures. I would say 3.5.1 by combining their votes, right? Of 27% and 25% in Jabulo and Danford now hold 52%. This makes them a majority shareholder or shareholders. This would make them a majority shareholder. This would make them majority shareholder and would allow them more influence over decision making. Okay. Next question, last question. So it says, as an existing shareholder, explain why you would be concerned about the strategy of Njabulo and Danford. So basically, I would say, as a shareholder, what if one of them have a disagreement? Then the company is not going to be run properly. But they are bringing two forces together, which means that they have the power, because they own 52%, they have the power to make unethical decisions, which is usually the answer, because corruption is everywhere, and because they own 52%, then they may use their power for unethical motives. Just keep it short and simple. Okay, so you can say why you would be concerned is because Danford and Njabulo may use their power or influence for corruption or unethical motives. This was 2 marks here, 2 marks here. This was 4 marks, so you would get 1 mark here, 1 mark here, and I think it's 1 mark for comparing the interest, 2 marks for comparing the interest rate and the return on shareholders' equity. So that's 4 there. This was also 4. So 1 mark here, 1 mark here, 2 marks here. Okay, and like that.